everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's KI Talk, Writing for the Media, How to Transform Your Research Findings into News. This webinar is one of our series KI Talks, which we launched last September. And we frequently have academia webinars in different fields, such as life sciences, material sciences, etc. We welcome you follow our webinars, either one on our website or our WeChat. Yeah, you are free to scan the QR code. Yeah, you can see it here to follow us. Before we start, I'd like to have a quick introduction of KI, the host, that is myself, and our speaker, Linda. Okay, brief introduction about KI. So who is KI? You might hear it before. KI is a joint venture between Elsevier and the Science Press, which is the main publishing arm of Chinese Academy of Sciences. And KI started in 2008 as a book business, and in 2013 we became an open access publishing service provider with a mission, Chinese roots and global impact. Now we publish over 120 journals across all disciplines. We are aiming to share first-class research outputs from China and international with the research community and the society all over the world. And myself, so I'm a host today. My name is Chow Ting, and Zhao is my first name. I know it's confusing. I hold a PhD in pure mathematics, and I joined KI since March of 2014. I list my main responsibility of KI here. I'm responsible of the partnership business development, and I'm also in charge of marketing department and setting up marketing strategies and activities for KI. This drives the reason why we plan this webinar. Within KI, our marketing team are working so hard to promote our excellent results on all channels, including Europe Alert. We know how important the marketing activity are to enlarge the impact and the visibility of great research result, even though it's a breakthrough one in a particular area. But when we close with our authors for finding out the great highlights of their article, we found that it sometimes consumes a lot of time. We have to have several rounds back and forward with authors to discuss how these new articles should be. So this sparked us to have this webinar. So this is made the first one we focus on this topic. So we may consider another one if we consider that's necessary. So we are so honored to be able to invite our science writer, Linda William, the speaker of today. So I noticed Linda has some detailed introduction of herself in her slides. So this is I will leave her to give more detailed introduction. Yeah, this is my introduction. During the webinar, everyone, if you have any question, you are free to write your questions in the chat box and below the screen. You are free. We can gather those questions to Linda, and when she could answer those questions at the Q&A session. Okay, I'll hand over to Linda. Yeah, Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shah. And I'm just going to attempt to share my presentation. So please bear with me one moment while I set that up. And can I just check that you can see that full screen now?
Perfect.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm really pleased to be here today. And we're going to be talking about, as Zha said, writing for the media, how to transform your research findings into news. I know it's not easy, so I'm hoping to share some tips and advice today that will make that a little bit easier for you. So I'm just going to begin by introducing myself. I have, over the years, I've written all kinds of things, from newspaper articles to websites and to annual reports. And I worked in the UK and New Zealand before moving to the Netherlands now, which is where I live. And for the past 10 years, what's relevant, I think, for this webinar is for the past 10 years, I've worked in academic publishing. And 6 years of those were in charge of Elsevier's research and communication channels. And the last 4 years, I've been working for myself as the owner of Blue Line Communications, working with Elsevier and working with KI, which I've been having a lot of fun, because what we've been doing is, over the last year, we've been focused on sharing some of the really interesting research that's being published in KI's 120 plus journals. And the way we've been doing that is by promoting these on a website called Eureka Alert. And Eureka Alert is run by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. I'm so sorry, my printer is configuring itself. Let me just switch it off. Sorry about that, it should stop in a moment. Now, the Eureka Alert website, it hosts press releases on peer-reviewed communications, proceedings, meeting announcements, all sorts of things. And we've been submitting press releases to Eureka Alert since March last year. We've had a lot of successes, actually, I'm delighted to report, and we've managed to highlight a really broad range of topics. But what we've also discovered is that it's very challenging for researchers to think in a media-friendly way. So in the webinar today, what we plan to cover is the value of writing simply. We're going to look at deciding what's newsworthy and what's not. We're going to talk about two things you really need to know about the media. We're going to talk about the anatomy of the press release, and that's really what's involved in a press release, the different pieces of content that you will find. And then I just want to share with you a few statistics and background on our experience as KI, the experience we've had with Eureka Alert. So let's dive straight in, and we're going to go now to look about the value of writing simply. And what I would say to you is it's not just about press releases, because if you can communicate simply, it's going to impact every aspect of the work that you do. Learning this skill is going to be really invaluable. And you're probably wondering who this person is over in the right-hand side there. Well, his name is Malcolm Skingle, and he is GlaxoSmithKline, or GSK's Director of Academic Liaison. And he is responsible for GSK's collaborations with academic institutions. So he basically decides who gets the funding and how much. So an important man to know. And in a recent podcast interview with Elsevier, he talked about the proposals that he receives from universities. And he says that many of these are unwieldy. Now that basically means too large or disorganized to function efficiently. They're long, very long, and they're also convoluted, which means very complex and difficult to follow. Now I've included a quote from him here that I think is quite shocking, really. He says that sometimes when he's finished reading the proposals he's received, he's not actually clear what the academic who's written the proposal is after, or even what disease state they want to treat with this proposal. And so if he gets a proposal of only a page or two, he's going to pass it on to someone who can approve the funding. If it's 30 pages or so, it's going to go in the bin. Now, what a waste of all that effort and time, but it just shows how important it is to make sure that you write your message clearly and succinctly. And at this point, I should probably apologize, because you're going to hear me use these or several words over and over in this webinar. Simple, simply, simplicity, easy to understand, because really that's the whole secret, not only to writing press release, but any kind of writing, It's making sure that your message is short and clear enough to be understood by anyone who reads it. And if you can develop that skill, it's going to help you not only, as we said, with press releases, it's going to help you with funding proposals, and that's those who scan the award applications for completeness and relevance, as well as the peer reviewers. They're all going to appreciate your clearly written proposal. And your communications with fellow researchers and managers. I mean, just like you, they're extremely busy people. And if you can communicate them communicate with them in a way that is easy for them to understand, you're more likely to get a prompt response. And it's also going to help with your research articles, I think. And again, I come back to, what is writing simply? It's about communicating your message in a way that people don't have to spend minutes or hours trying to understand and decipher. They should understand the key points that you want to make at a glance. So now we're going to move on to deciding what is newsworthy and what's not. I'm going to share with you now the advice that the KI publishers follow when they're selecting potential press release articles in KI's journals. Be current. Now, it has to be recent. It's called news because it's new, and the more recent, the better from the media's perspective. And ideally, they'd like to be the first one to publish it, so they want something that's really hot off the press. And I've shared the 90-day deadline that Eureka Alert operates. So Eureka Alert, the website that I mentioned that's run by AAAS that we publish on, they have a 90-day deadline. So the article, they will only accept press releases on research that has been published in a peer-reviewed journal within the last 90 days. It's got to have broad appeal. I've said there are 500 readers in place of 5, but what I mean is it doesn't have to be relevant to every field, but it shouldn't be really niche research that only a handful of people are going to find of interest. Having said that, there are exceptions. So the topic might be niche, and I'm going to give the example of quantum physics. There are some areas of quantum physics where it's so niche that potentially only 10 people will ever understand that paper. However, if those 10 people can, or one of those 10 people can communicate those findings clearly, simply, and in an easy understand way, those findings might actually have implications for our entire world. So I'm going to say it's about the difference between talking about what you've studied and the importance of your findings. And I'm going to come back to that later on. But quantum physics is a really good example of that. It's not about what they studied because nobody understands that. It's about what they found. And that is the key. As I say, we'll come back to that later on. Say something new. Now, if the paper is on an interesting topic, and there are lots of interesting papers out there, but it doesn't supply new findings, it may not be suitable for a press release. And I know that a lot of people find this really struggle with this point. What is new? What do we mean by news? Because I've seen it in the press releases that not only researchers have submitted, but also I know publishers can struggle with it too. And even I can struggle with it too sometimes. But so I think because it's difficult, it's worth taking a moment to look at each of these points that I've listed here separately. And I'm going to use examples of KI journal articles we've promoted on Eureka Alert to explain each of these points. So here, this first one, is it a new finding that will progress the field? Well, this is probably the easiest of the criteria for us all to recognize. And I've used this example, which is based on an article that was published in the journal Bioactive Materials. And it's a really interesting advance in the field of medicine that was picked up by 5 media outlets because of its potential to not only improve treatments following surgery or injury, but reduce the number of bone infections. And that's not only important for the field, actually, it's important or interesting for the public to know because it's something that has the potential to impact all of us. So this is really a new finding in the field. Does it offer an alternative perspective on findings that are already covered in the news? So, okay, you may not have something that's groundbreakingly new, but you might have something that really helps us think about it in a different way or build on the existing knowledge. And in this case, this article that was, or this press release that's based on an article published in Fundamental Research is a good example of that. Climate change is not a new topic. It's covered extensively in the news. But this article shines a new light, I think, on one of the potential sources of greenhouse gases. Does it reflect current news stories and interests? What do we mean by that? Well, this, again, a good example here from KI. This press release is based on an article published in the Asian Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology, and it talks about improving athletic performance. And we released it in August 2021, which coincided with the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo. So it was, the Olympic Games were obviously heavily featured in the news, and because this had an athletic angle, it was a nice link to that news interest. Is it in the public interest? Well, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are very important, very widely followed and inspire, I know, a lot of researchers. And in this case, this press release, which is based on an article published in the China Economic Quarterly International, or two articles actually that were published in that journal, I think are nice reflections of topics that are linked to the SDG goals. In this left-hand case, it's linked to gender equality, and the right-hand case, good health and well-being. So they're important. They're progressing a field of research that's very important and topical. Does it coincide with an anniversary or date of interest? Now, we're still in the early stages of publishing KI press releases. I don't have a direct KI example to share with you here, but let me use a couple of other examples to show you what I mean. So here in this case, it could be research that's conducted to mark an anniversary, and this screenshot that you see refers to research that was conducted 20 years on from the 9/11 bombings. Or it could be, for example, to coincide with a World Awareness Day, in this case a report to coincide with Alzheimer's Awareness Day in September last year. Or it could be that your findings happen to be relevant to an upcoming event. For example, last year we had the COP26 summit that was held in the UK, and if you had published climate change research around that time, it's something topical in the news, and your research is linked to it, and that makes it topical and relevant. Two things you need to know about the media. These are really both important facts to know, because they explain why I'm making these recommendations in this presentation. They explain why you need to invest time in your press releases. Most of them aren't scientists. Some may have a science background, but others won't. And that means your explanation has to be suitable for a non-scientific audience. And we come back to simple and easy to understand, those two words, or two sets of words again. What you want is them to look like this. They are happy, they understand it. What you don't want is them to look like this, frustrated and confused. So you've got to make sure that you're writing for a non-scientific audience. Another important thing to know, just like you, they are very busy people. And that's important because although they will look for interesting, or invest time in looking for interesting research to report on, the easier you make it for them, the more likely it is that your article is the one that they are going to pick up and publish. And that means that you need to ensure that it only takes them a couple of seconds to identify what the news angle is. And you can do that through things like the headline that you use and your summary or key findings. And we're going to come on to those in later slides. And your goal is to reduce the amount of time that they need to invest in turning your press release into a news item. So if in your press release you have a good structural flow in place, we'll talk about that also later, and the key pieces of information, and there are some great quotes and images, then it's not going to take the reporter, the journalist, long to turn it into a news story, and they're more likely to pick up on your press release. We're going to move on now to the anatomy of a press release, and this is really the separate items that you should include or ideally include in your press release. There are a few that you will see there in blue. That's because we're going to talk about those on the following slides. So I'm not going to touch on those now, but the others are worth talking about. And so let's just spend a few moments on them now. The release date. Okay, this is the date that you are happy for your news to appear in the public domain. It may be a week or more later than the date that you send out your press release. If that's the case, this is called an embargo. It means you've embargoed your press release until some date in the future. What I would say is don't embargo it unless you need to. It can be really annoying if a reporter gets a great story and sees they can't publish it for 2 weeks. But there are times it's relevant. And you might say, well, if I don't want it published yet, why would I bother sending out my press release early? Well, it gives the reporter time to work on the story, and they will have a final version ready for your embargo date. So it does have advantages. It means that your news can hit the headlines as soon as your embargo date is reached. We also have their date and location. That's the date you are issuing the press release. And that's important to include on the press release because it lets the reporters know how current the news is. They're seeing a stream of things online, and if they can see, oh, okay, that's got today's release date, they know that it's current. And sometimes location can be useful too. It just helps them work out where it's come from, and there might be some regional importance to that too. The boilerplate. This is usually a paragraph or two about the institution, company, or the researcher who is issuing the press release, who is responsible for writing the press release. And that just gives context to the reporter to let them know where the press release is coming from, and I suppose give it some sort of provenance really. And your contact information. This is very important so that the reporter can get hold of you if they have any questions. And I would say do include a phone number because they don't want to wait for you to check your emails. They want to get hold of you as soon as possible. So make sure you've got a telephone number in there. Okay, we're going to move along now to look at some of these blue points. But before we do that, I would say the first and vital step in preparing and writing your press release is to make sure you've actually got a point of news to share. We might have said it's newsworthy. We've done that on the previous slides. We said, okay, this is a newsworthy, it's linked to something important that's happening, or it's a new discovery. But now you've got to find the news. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think this quote from the Oxford University Press Media team sums it up perfectly. And because it sums it up so perfectly, let's take a moment to read it together. The most important aspect is to remember that the research should contain a hook or a main point of interest for the reader and the journalist. And this hook provides a main point of focus for the release itself and for the headline for the article. And this next point is so important, I've made it bold. If you cannot identify the hook, then it is unlikely that we can. So that's the media team there at Oxford University Press speaking. And as we've already discussed, your university media team, the marketing team at KI, journalists themselves are generally only going to have a very, very basic understanding of your field, if any understanding at all. So the hook, essentially, is the reason why this paper you should be written should be the paper you've written should be promoted. And you can think of it as a sentence that justifies why your article is newsworthy. And if you can't find one, if you can't summarize in a sentence why, what the news is in your news press release, then don't expect anyone else to, because if you don't know it, we won't either. And if you can't find it, then it's time to step back, I think, and reevaluate whether it's actually worth writing a press release. It's really crucial, and I can't overstate this enough, it's really crucial you understand yourself what the news angle is. Otherwise, you can't explain it to others. Now, the headline, I would say arguably, this is the most important part of your press release. It's the first thing that people are going to read, and it's what's going to help them decide whether they want to invest their time, spend their time reading the rest of your press release. So it's important to spend time getting it right. So I've shared here a few tips, and on the coming slides as well, that will hopefully help you get it right. Don't make it long. Eureka Alert recommends a maximum of 90 characters, and that's including spaces. And there's a button in Word on the top menu that will help you check your character numbers. I use that all the time to check whether I'm exceeding that recommended 90 characters. So that's including spaces. And it's not only important for grabbing attention, the length of your headline is important because once it's posted online, keeping it short means it's not going to be cut off in an awkward place on social media or on the promotional banners that KI do or on search engine results pages. You're not going to have it chopped off, which will be really unclear for people. What is that article about? Use numbers where you can. I say that because if you've increased the speed or accuracy of a process by 30%, say so in your headline. That's really impressive. And those numbers can really help your readers understand the impact of your research. So anything you can quantify, put a number around, do that. It's really useful. And the present tense works best. I realized your research took place in the past, but using the present tense in your headline gives it a sense of urgency and relevance. And we move on to a really important point now. Remember, it's not a research paper. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the headlines that are used in research papers, but they're very different from the headlines that you want to use in a press release. And I've received press release headlines before now that contain scientific formulas. That's not going to work, and we have to remove those. And earlier in the presentation, I talked about the difference between communicating in a press release what you studied and the importance of your findings. And I said I would come back to that point. Well, this is the moment I'm going to mention it again. Your headline should not be about what you did. I conducted a study of 25 people. It should be about what you found, and ideally it should highlight what your findings mean in practical terms. So what are the implications of those findings? What are they going to change? What are they going to impact? And let's look at some examples now to try and make that a little bit clearer. And these headlines, hopefully, that I'm going to show you now will also show best practice from the previous slide where we talked about length and we talked about current tense, etc. So let's start with an example from the two screenshots you see on the screen in front of you. I've just blown them up here. So that there, first you're seeing the research paper headline. Nothing wrong with it, as I say, nothing wrong with any of these research paper headlines. But by the time we get to the press release, we want to explain the implications of or what the possible implications will be of this research. Because this isn't so important, let's look at some more. Again, great research paper headline, but we just want to simplify that when we get it into a press release. Make it easy for everyone to understand. Again, that's a very nice short research paper headline. Ironically, the press release headline is longer, but it's explaining the implications of the research that's been conducted. And we'll just again do a few more. This explains what was done, the research paper headline. And here we explain what they found in the press release version. And a final one. We're just simplifying the explanation and showing what these findings can do. So that's a little bit there about the headline. And now we're going to move on to the summary or key points. Now, you won't find these in every press release, but I think they're a really good idea to include. And they're compulsory, so they're a must if you're posting a press release on Eureka Alert. And the advantage of the summary is that they can help a reporter understand your work and its results. And it might help if I say, think of the summary as like an abstract, only a lot shorter. And they highlight the study's purpose and its findings. And the way they're used on Eureka Alert is really useful. When you visit the site, you will see all the latest releases, and you'll see these little summaries listed of each one. So they're helpful for readers, but they're also helpful for SEO because they can appear in search engine results, in the results lists that are returned by search engines. Again, keep it short. Eureka Alert recommends a maximum of 75 words, and we're looking for really simple explanations here. And I've included a few from Eureka Alert that I like. These aren't necessarily KI summaries, but they're recent posts on Eureka Alert, and I think the press release writers have done a great job of summarizing. Here, everything you need to know in this summary would make me want to read on and find out more, and I know what I'm going to be reading about before I click to open that press release. That's really important. I know what I'm going to be reading, and I can make that decision whether I want to read on. Another nice one, super short. They've done a great job of packing a lot of information here into just a few words. And by the way, this will be available on YouTube, this presentation. And so if you want to go back and look at any of these, you can do, or just visit Eureka Alert website. You'll see plenty of examples there, some better than others. And I've included this last one here. It's a little bit longer than the others, but it's just to say, you know, they can be a bit longer. That's fine. It's about making them relevant. So if it's relevant to include more information, feel comfortable to do so. But again, bear in mind that maximum 75 words ideally. Okay. Writing the press release, the key do's and don'ts. Now, I could have made these really long lists, but I thought let's try and keep it compact because I want you to remember these points. If you can remember these points, you're already going to come a long way in terms of writing a better press release. And I know some of those do's aren't magically immediately clear what I mean by those, but don't worry because I'm going to go into them in more detail now on the next few slides. This is just a summary slide. But so the do's are think in circles. As I say, I'll explain that in a moment. Provide context. Include quotes from an author and add at least one image. Now, I don't go into the don'ts in more detail on the coming slides, so I'm going to talk about those in more detail right now. And don't paste in your abstract. I have seen press releases where researchers have done this. Your abstract is written for a scientific, technical audience. It's not going to be understood by me. It's not going to be understood by reporters or the general public. Don't do it. Take the time to write it, simplify it, and present it in an easy to understand way. Which brings us to our next point, which I've highlighted or bolded because it's so important. Don't get technical. Now, what I mean by that is you don't have to dumb it down. People aren't stupid, but they just don't have your background. So it might be relevant to include a formula in your body text of your press release, but then explain what that formula is. So you can say, you know, we added whatever the formula is, and then just put in brackets, that's a mix of this chemical and this chemical. So it's not that you have to really make it childlike. You just have to make sure that you recognize that people don't have your niche educational training. I mean, even if people have a high education level, they haven't studied in your subject area. So it's just making sure that you give people the information they need to understand the point that you want to make. And that ties into the next one. Don't forget who your audience is. And the final one there, don't write more than 500 words. Well, sometimes if you've got a really strong piece of research, it will be a little bit longer than that. But general best practice is to try and keep it under the 500 word mark. Your main takeaway, press release should be easy to understand. Now, I promised you we would look at that list of do's in a little bit more detail, and we are going to do that now. So what did I mean by think in circles? Well, the circular approach is, okay, let me put it another way. It can be very tempting to write in a linear way. So that means a step-by-step explanation of what you did, and then you end with what you found. So your findings are at the end of your piece of text that you've written. That's not how you do it with the press release. You write in a circular way. So you start with what you found. That needs to be right up there in your headline, in your summary, and in the first couple of paragraphs of your press release. Then you talk about how you did it, and then you come back at the end of your press release to your key findings. So you're creating this circle of information. And that ensures that if people only read the first few lines of your press release, which is generally what happens, then they can still grasp what you found and why it's important. In context, what do I mean by that? Well, I've actually included an example which I think helps to explain it here on the next slide. So you see here, it's based on an article that was published in the KI journal Green Chemical Engineering, and it explains how a new process could help to separate out high purity metals during the solvent extraction process. That sounds very interesting, but it doesn't really explain to me why it's important. But the press release does give me context. It explains that this new process is valuable because of the limitations of existing options. So now I realize that this finding is going to change how this industry works, how this industry process is operated, and that's going to have a big impact on the industry itself. So that context is really invaluable for helping me understand these findings. And then quotes. Now, these are really essential. They help to bring the press release to life, and reporters will always look for them. And whereas most of your text in your press release is going to focus on facts, quotes give you a chance to express opinions, and they humanize the press release, give you a glimpse behind the curtain of the person who's conducted this study. And for example, I always love to hear about when a researcher has been surprised by results. It's really interesting that, you know, to me they're interesting, but to hear that they're also interesting to the researcher is fascinating. Or to hear about a problem that they've bumped into and solved. Just helps people identify with your research and with you. And images. Now, if you've got a strong graphic from your research article, you can include that. If you haven't, your press officer or publisher can help you probably find a relevant image. And we do that for the press releases we publish on the KI website. And it doesn't have to cost you money, because if you're submitting press releases yourself and you're looking for an image, there are a couple of websites. I've included the links or the URLs here. And these websites allow you to download images and use them for free. So KI and Eureka Alert. I promised at the beginning of this presentation I'll tell you a little bit about our journey. And so we've published about 46 press releases on Eureka Alert since we started in March last year. So we're averaging just under 4 press releases a month. That can vary, by the way. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 7 or 8. It depends on the quality of or how many relevant articles that we've published that month. And the most impactful press release to date is definitely the one I've included the headline of there. Researchers discover that the Omicron variant may have originated in mice. That's actually was published in January of this year, that press release, and it was picked up immediately by 16 news outlets, and that was including national newspapers in the UK and India. And yeah, it's just loads of coverage. And I'm delighted to say that the press releases we are publishing on Eureka Alert and on the KI website are being picked up by channels globally. And on this next slide here, you just see just a few of the sites that have been featuring them. And they really vary in location, vary in the audience that they're appealing to. And on some of them, they've been translated, for example, there into French, also into other languages. And it's not just about the exposure on media outlets that the press releases are receiving, they're also receiving attention on social media. And, you know, we like to think, hopefully, maybe even contributing to their citations. So as we come to the end of this presentation, what are the lessons that we have learned in publishing these press releases over the last year? Well, I don't think any of the points I'm about to reveal will really surprise you, because they have informed and shaped the presentation that I've just shared with you. But let's go through them now together. People often find it hard to determine which articles are newsworthy. That's not just the researchers themselves, it's also the journal editors. I think KI publishers wouldn't mind me saying they had struggled with that too. And to be honest, so do I sometimes. And there are press releases we've published that have surprised me that they haven't done as well as I'd expected, or there are others that have done much better than I expected. For example, there was one in early 2021 when we were just getting going that was called, the title was "Etching Process Enhances the Extraction of Hydrogen During Water Electrolysis." I didn't think it would do half as well as it did, but it got so much media and social media attention. The press releases we receive often need a lot of rewriting. That goes back to the points I've made during this presentation. It's because they are written often in a technical way, and some of them I have to sit and rewrite with the help of search engines, basically looking up every second word to understand what the researcher means. So please, I come back to make it simple, make it easy to understand. And even when some researchers think they're writing simply, they aren't. You can really see in some press releases that they've made an enormous effort, and they're doing a great job there explaining. They might start with a nice headline and a nice introduction, but then they just slip back into technical language. So I really urge you, if you're writing a press release, stop and think. I know what that term means. Will other people know what it means? Because there's a good chance they won't. It takes a lot of work, a press release. It takes a lot of time, I know, for you to write them, especially when you're moving outside your usual comfort zone and you're writing in a way that it's not familiar to you, perhaps. And it takes a lot of time for us to rewrite them, to post them, get the images right, and then to promote them on social media. But what I would say is it's worth it. The time that you invest, the time that we invest, it's just so worth it, because communicating science effectively is essential for so many reasons. I mean, we're living in an age when public faith in research has been impacted in many parts of the world. And also where funding in some areas is not as free-flowing as it used to be. There's restrictions on funding. So it's so important to demonstrate the impact and the importance of what you're working on in a way that people can understand. So finally, I would say the lessons learned are: communicate in a simple and easy to understand way, and you will go a long way. So thank you very, very much for your time today. And I'd like to hand back to Zhao.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Here I do have several questions. You may need help to answer. First one, yeah, what do you think I prepared the news story before publication online or after the publication? What do you think, which is better?
I would say before. Even if you can always use that embargo that we talked about to delay the publication until the article has appeared online, because you want your research article to be online before your press release is published. but prepare it beforehand, because then you've got time to think about it. You've got that time to invest in writing it simply. So yeah, that would always be my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a small second question. You mentioned about the highlight should be simple and easy to understand. Do you think we take that as question will be a better consideration for or highlight?
Yeah, questions can be effective. If that's what, I'm not sure if that was what the question refers to. Was it that if you
highlight a question?
Yeah, a question can work really well. That's also a good way of doing it. Or a statement, how something works, or why something. Using the words how and why at the beginning of a headline can be effective too. It all depends on what your finding is, and whether a question is good if it's a strong question. A question for the sake of it may not be worth it. It really depends on the individual press release.
Yeah, I saw another question on the chat box. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, if we use images from website, which you mentioned, which kind of copyright we should choose? Several types of the copyright are offered, but really make me confused. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I haven't encountered that with the websites that I have mentioned there. There aren't any copyright. I think you're referring to probably the licenses, are you? The sharing licenses. I haven't noticed that there. Ideally, you would credit the person who had taken the photograph, the image. That's really helpful, I think, and just good practice anyway. We try to do that. But yes, I haven't. I do know what you mean. On some sites, there are different sharing licenses which determine how you can use that image. But these particular websites, I haven't encountered that issue.
So you mean we need to ask for the authors, the credit person, to ask for permission?
No, they've posted. So on those URLs that I included there, the photographers or the people who own the images have given permission for them to be used. So you can download them and use them. But it's sometimes nice to put, if you're putting a caption for the image, for example, to put credit and then the name of the person who took the image. And you can find that on the website. I think that's, they've given that image for free. So it's quite nice to just acknowledge them if you're going to use it.
Okay, thanks. There another question from MB. If the press release is rejected by your alert, is there any other portal we can send to? Please give some options.
Yeah. Well, you can try it. I mean, I would try your institution. Try your institution press office, because they may be able to help you approach other channels, or advise you why your press release was rejected. If it's been rejected because it's over the 90-day limit, then I would say it's probably too old to be posted anyway. It's not really a press release. You could always perhaps post it on your website, or if you have one, but it's not a news release anymore. It's too old. But if it's within the 90-day limit and Eureka has rejected it, then I would urge you to talk to your press office if you have one at your institution, because it may be that it needs to be rewritten a bit before you submit it somewhere else.
Yeah, thanks. I think you answered. Well, I do have another question, but I think you already answered that, because you mentioned because your alert normally you need to pay for that, and then you can open the channel to use your alert. So what if I cannot use your alert? How can I share my articles?
Yeah, and I haven't really answered it, have I? Because I haven't given alternative channels. I don't know of any off the top of my head that you don't pay for, because they're promoting it for you. They've invested the money in making sure they've got the SEO and the website capability to support promotion of press releases. So most of them are paid for, but that doesn't stop you posting it on your own website and then doing social media around it to encourage people to visit your website. And if you don't have your own website, there are various blog sites. Look for them in your discipline. Or again, talk to your university press office about what channels they would recommend, I would say.
Yeah, I think that it's a good idea to share the various channels. Yeah, that's done for every questions. Yeah, as Linda already mentioned during her talk, this webinar will record it and shared online, which you can find this recorded video via our website and Bilibili. You can scan our QR code if you're able to. Maybe let me share my screen first. Share my screen first. Yeah, please share the screen. Yeah, I'd like to share. Yeah, you can maybe here either follow our website or scan our QR code to follow our WeChat account to find out where the webinar recorded. Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions, and of course thanks Linda for wonderful talks. It helped a lot. Yeah, help a lot for the authors. Yeah. We may consider for the next talks about this writing for the media in the future. And I work on everyone on the line and also on the Zoom to follow us to have, if you are interested for other topics. Yeah, I think that's done for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being so attentive. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.